Archange Touadéa, President of the Central African Republic.
Excellences,
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor and a great responsibility for me to speak on behalf of the Central African Republic here in this chamber where the future of humanity hangs in the balance. My country, located in the heart of Africa, portrays the brutal reality of climate change, drought, flooding, deforestation, biodiversity loss. All of the above are intensifying year in, year out, making people already poverty-stricken more vulnerable, people who are suffering food insecurity and humanitarian crises. The Central African Republic, although it's one of the smallest emitters of greenhouse gases, is paying a disproportionate price through the crises which we didn't contribute to. This situation compels us to take the floor to recall that climate justice and global solidarity should be turned into deeds instead of simply remaining good intentions. Excellencies, we know that the world has fallen behind. 2 months remain before the COP30. Only 40-odd countries, however, have submitted their renewed NDCs. And this despite the fact that scientists are recalling the urgency of maintaining the 1.5 degrees objective. The big emitters responsible for 80% of emissions have not yet submitted responses in keeping with the challenges we face. Piecemeal solutions are insufficient. History shows that we can undergo transformation, and the COP is an opportunity for us to deliver measurable results, for our people. The Africa region is taking action with the support of the World Bank and the Global Environment Fund. We have launched the Previa project aimed at promoting resilient infrastructure. This project is nature-based. It will strengthen urban resilience in Bibarati and Bangui. Specifically, it will benefit 300,000 people. It will create 3.5 thousand green jobs, especially for women and young people. That's what it means, moving from commitments to results. Furthermore, we have a national strategy for the sustainable management of 7 million hectares, which are well protected, and some of them on the UNESCO Intangible Heritage list. It's not just about conservation. This is our direct contribution to striking a global climate equilibrium. Ladies and gentlemen, in September of last year in Addis Ababa at the African Climate Summit, Africa spoke with one voice, accelerating climate solutions and financing for green and resilient development is what we called for. The Central African Republic is unswervingly committed to the above. We are promoting homegrown, inclusive solutions that are rooted in our communities. We are calling for equitable, direct, and streamlined access to climate financing which is currently inaccessible and far too complex for vulnerable countries. We also want to swiftly see the operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund so that frontline countries can address the disasters threatening their very survival. Our ambition is clear-cut. We want resilient green cities. We want to use nature to protect us, to ensure that we can resist climate shocks. We want to build low-carbon economies that generates jobs and hope for our young people. We want climate governance that's equitable and inclusive, in which all citizens become agents of the transition. However, to get there, we need much more than pronouncements. We need climate integrity, consistency between what we say here and what we do back in our countries. Excellencies, partners, history is looking at what we do. Any delays, any missed deadlines results in lives lost, in generations sacrificed. The Central African Republic would like to reiterate our commitment to being a resolute actor of the fight for our climate. And we'd like to underscore that a fight waged by one country is not enough. What is called for is real operational global solidarity. We do not have the right to be indifferent. We no longer have the right to the status quo. We have a shared but differentiated responsibility through which we can transform this crisis into an opportunity to build a fair, low carbon and sustainable future for all. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Central African Republic. The next speaker is His Excellency Gaston Brown, Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda.
Thank you very much, Co-Chair. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. For small island developing states, global decarbonization is not optional. It is a matter of justice. For over a century, the fossil fuel economy concentrated wealth and power in a few nations and industries. Those who profited most should now shoulder the cost of rapid, orderly, and fair transition. This is the polluter pays principle in action. Antigua and Barbuda has endorsed the Fossil Fuel Treaty Initiative to create a rules-based phase-out of coal, oil, and gas backed by finance and technology. Climate change is a threat multiplier. It magnifies every vulnerability and accelerates every injustice. The farmer without irrigation loses his crop entirely. The fisher without insurance loses his boat and livelihood. Meanwhile, the large polluters rebuild and even expand. Across the Caribbean, the Pacific, and Africa, loss and damage is not a projection. It is our daily reality. For SIDS, holding a line at 1.5 degrees is non-negotiable. It is quintessential to our survival. Science confirms that fossil fuel emissions are contributing to climate change and that an overshoot of the 1.5 degrees will trigger irreversible damage. Law, to include the advisory opinions, tell us that it is a binding benchmark, not a bargaining chip. Morality tells us that we cannot abandon it. Every fraction of a degree beyond 1.5 multiplies injustice. Stronger storms, higher seas, deeper loss and damage. Attribution science proves that the consequences of floods, storms, droughts, heat waves, and sea level rise destroying our countries are a direct consequence of emissions that we did not create. Attribution science also provides the evidence to hold the large polluters accountable. And I say to this august body that if diplomacy fails, then we should use the courts to hold these large polluters accountable. Without the attribution science, loss and damage risk would be dismissed as charity rather than recognized as responsibility. The global finance system remains unfit for purpose. IFIs and multilateral banks are not as responsive as they ought to be. Adaptation, for example, will cost up to $387 billion annually, and loss and damage already runs in the hundreds of billions. However, the climate funding for adaptation and mitigation remains grossly inadequate, and there is little funding available to fuel the urgent transition needed. Fairness demands equitable participation in the transition to include access to quality technologies, durable, efficient, low-carbon solutions at costs comparable to fossil fuels, protection from unfair burdens, finance at scale, that is concessional financing, primarily non-debt creating flows for renewable energy, clean transport, and resilient infrastructure. And it also requires capacity building that is investments in people and institutions to sustain a net zero future. Colleagues, Antigua and Barbuda's National Adaptation Plan charts a clear path, and our updated NDC this year will move us closer to a green, resilient future. From survival to justice, that is our call today. Let us treat the 1.5-degree limit as a lifeline, not as a line in the sand. Let us make the polluter pays principle the foundation of a fair transition. And let us act not tomorrow, but today, so that the smallest and most vulnerable nations among us are not left to face the greatest storms alone. Finally, let us continue to fight to accelerate the transition to renewables in protecting our planet and certainly in the interests of all of humanity. I thank you.
Thank you, Antigua and Barbuda. The next speaker is His Excellency Siti